Gotta say got it, I think. So I could have done that ahead of time.
All righty, so I think we are officially live. Let me just go to our channel to make sure. Oh no. There we are. All right, we are live. So we'll get this party started. If anyone is watching, thank you for watching. We are here, the Marine and Coastal Ecology Research Center. This is our YouTube channel, Ocean Smarts and Whale Farts, which is inspired by our guest, Dr. Redenberg, her TED Talk. If you haven't checked that out, definitely go check that out. Today, we are starting a new series called Whack-A-Mole Wednesdays. And why is it called Whack-A-Mole Wednesdays? If you think about, those round robin topics, everybody in elementary school, we always did this where we would take turns reading books. And after someone was done reading, they would choose whenever they're done reading, they would stop, and someone else from the other side of the room randomly, without the teacher calling on them, would just pop up and start reading the next part. So that's kind of how these dialogues are going to go. We're just going to have an open, more informal conversation about really hot topics in marine biology and biology in the field in general. So with that, we're really excited. We hope everyone else is excited, and I will start with introducing everybody. So I'm Sierra. You've seen me probably before. I'm a research assistant at the Marine and Coastal Ecology Research Center, which is led by Dr. Mithriel MacKay. And we also have our other research assistants. We have Annabelle Stevenson, Melissa Hitzfield, Iris de la Cruz, and our special guest today is Dr. Joy Redenberg. And Dr. Joy Redenberg is currently a professor and comparative anatomist. She's at the, forgive me if I butcher the school, but Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai.
And we also I can versus I can't.
Oh, perfect. Icahn School. And Dr. Makai is, of course, in charge of all of us and runs the Marine and Coastal Ecology Research Center. And she is a director of research and education and international experiential field programs. So now I'd really like everyone to, or well, at least Dr. Makai and Dr. Redenberg, if you guys would want to say, I guess, introduce yourselves a little bit and your current position and how you got there. And we'll start with Dr. Redenberg, if you don't mind.
Okay, so as you heard, my name is Dr. Reidenberg. I am a comparative anatomist at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, which is a medical school, not the usual place where you would find someone doing marine biology work, particularly on marine mammals. My research is focused on animals adapted to environmental extremes, hoping that we can learn from nature how these animals have adapted and copy those adaptations and apply them back to people as treatments for various diseases that mimic those conditions, or to create protective technology for people who want to live and work in those unusual conditions. And marine mammals certainly fit the bill for an unusual animal living in a very unusual environment. How I got there, well, I followed a relatively straightforward path, going from college to graduate school, and then from there into a teaching position at the medical school. But I won't belabor the entire details of the story, because then this will go on for a whole hour and you'll hear all of the details of how I got there. But in just a quick little nutshell, when I was in high school, I was really oscillating back and forth between a career in something to do with animals, because I liked animals and science, or art. That was my other focus area. And as an artist, I'm very visual and very visually oriented. And therefore, I chose anatomy as my career specialty because it is so visual. And all of my notes are in pictures.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for your introduction. And Dr. Makai, would you also like to share your current position and how you got there?
Sure. So Sarah, thanks for all of this. You guys are all superstars. I'm really excited that we're doing this, and having Dr. Reidenberg as our first guest is amazing. I have an unconventional path to marine biology as well. So I started off growing up in a beach town. Both sides of my family are from a small beach town in Massachusetts, and knew that I wanted to do something with marine biology. But I ended up in college actually getting a degree in clinical laboratory medicine. And I did that for a long time. Life kind of switched things around for me for a while. So, and I loved it. The background in clinical lab medicine is not that different from what I do, because you have a bunch of unknowns and you have to figure out what's going on. And I like puzzles a lot. And then eventually I raised 4 kids. So they grew up. And one of my kids actually said to me, Mom, you need to go back to grad school. And I laughed. Oh, and then I thought about it and said, I don't have a really good reason not to. So I went back and went to graduate school to do what I started off wanting to do at the beginning, which was studying whales. And so now the Coastal Center, MCERC, lets me continue to teach the way I did all through my career in medicine, 25 years doing that, and as a paramedic and teaching. So I continue to do that, which means I get to get excited and then tell everybody about it. But then I also get to do my own research in whales. So I like doing that a lot and creating field programs. I'm not a real good sit still person, so doing field programs is a really good match for me. And I like riddles, so behaviors are a really good match. So I ended up going from a bunch of different hospital laboratories and working in the field as a medic to being in marine biology.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, I always hear a lot of nonlinear pathways, which is kind of confusing, but also very relieving at the same time, because you always just end up kind of where you're meant to be. So we'll go ahead and we're a little bit earlier in our process and in our career journeys, but Melissa, would you want to share, what you're doing now and how you got there too?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. I am research assistant at MCRC, have been for about a year now, working on various humpback whale research projects. And I graduated from Eckerd College, which is in St. Petersburg, Florida, last year, and received my degree in marine biology. And I knew I always wanted to work with animals as well, but kind of figured out that I wanted to work in marine biology related field in high school. And I went through a vet tech program too in high school. So have a background in the vet sciences as well. And I'm also a manatee research assistant through the Clearwater Marine Aquarium, which is my full-time job. So I'm out in the field a lot, tracking tagged manatees that were rescued because they were orphans. So that's a really awesome job. But really, really enjoying my work here at MCRC.
Nice, thank you. And Annabelle?
Hi, I'm Annabelle. Yeah, I'm certainly a little earlier on in my career. I'm currently working in retail, but I have many diverse interests, and I've always kind of gravitated more towards, anything animals and nature related. So I started off as a bio major in college because everybody in my family, all my guidance counselors were like, you would be such a great doctor. Like I was super into anatomy and all that stuff. And then I got to college and I was like, I think I really prefer like the animal side of everything and the nature thing and looking into more of those questions. So I studied that more, got more into that and ended up changing my major to wildlife conservation and ecology. And then my senior year, I took a vertebrate morphology class and comparative anatomy. And I was really interested in that. So I think I have a lot of that in common with Dr. Redenberg. So definitely like exploring more of my skill sets now and seeing what I'm good at.
Nice. All right. Thank you. And Iris?
Hi, I'm Iris. I went to Texas A&M at Galveston. I graduated in 2016. I have a degree in marine biology. I have always loved marine biology since I was like 3, maybe even since before. So I've never had a second thought about it. I currently work in histology lab with Texas A&M main campus in College Station, Texas. I work closely with some pathologists, and for a while I wanted to be a marine pathologist. So that's where I am right now. We'll see where it goes.
Awesome. All right. And then I feel like I always talk about myself a lot on the channel. There's a YouTube video about me introducing myself, so I'll kind of spare our time in this discussion for that. And if you want to see what I'm all about, go ahead and check that out. But for now, we will kind of get the conversation really started. And I would like to start with asking Dr. Redenberg and Dr. Makai, what do you tell people today when they ask, like, how do I become a marine biologist? Like, how do I prepare for that?
Well, I don't consider myself 100% a marine biologist, so I sometimes wonder if I'm the right person when they ask that question of me. But I do think that if you want to be a marine biologist, you probably need to pursue higher education first. That's the first step coming out of high school, that you want to go to college and you want to do a major that's somewhat related to the marine biology. It doesn't have to be marine biology. It can be animal studies, it can be biology, it can be chemistry even. It all depends on what particular focus area really grabs your interest. But after college, I think one needs to ask themselves, what do they envision themselves doing in a marine biology career to decide how much further education they really need. So if they envision themselves as the head of a laboratory or the head of a research group or the head of any kind of organization, they're going to need more advanced training than just college. And so they need to think about whether they want to go on to get a master's degree or a doctoral degree. If, on the other hand, they just want to be an employee of some organization and let someone else worry about the management decisions and what direction the research projects are going, you don't necessarily have to have those advanced degrees. You can get into the field a little bit earlier, but you won't advance as far. So I think that that's a serious question to consider. If you like to work with your hands a lot, but you don't want to work with your head as much, that doesn't mean you're stupid. I just mean you don't want to spend your time worrying about where the money's coming from or who you're going to hire, or how you're going to advertise the program or lobby, Congress if you want to make changes in the law or whatever it is. If you just want to do a lot of the hands-on work, but not guide the ship, so to speak, you don't need to be the captain of the ship. You don't need to go so far in your training. And you can have a very satisfying career doing marine biology research, but it would be under the direction of someone else. I personally like the idea of captaining my own ship because I want to ask all the questions and I want to design the projects to answer them. So I think that it's probably the same in someone whose career is focused only in marine biology. Mine is not. I do a lot of medical science work, but it's the same concept. The structure is still very similar in most science careers. So I think that's the first question one has to answer for themselves. How far do you want to go? How much of a leadership position do you want? And that determines just how much education you will need.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that too, it reminded me of something really valuable that I learned from one of my professors in school. She was telling us, look at the jobs that we're interested in having after we graduate and look at their requirements. And that kind of changed a lot for me because I was like, oh, that means, there are some things where you do need a master's degree or there are some things where you just need years of experience. So yeah, you could either just focusing on what you would really want to do for the rest of your career and trajectory will help guide the steps that you should take. That was just my little 2 cents there. But if anybody else has anything else to add for that.
Yeah, I want to kind of expand on that. Dr. Redenberg and I have pretty much the same approach when people always ask, I don't know about you ladies, but when people find out I'm a marine biologist, the first thing they say is, I always wanted to be a marine biologist, right? Everybody says that. And I always want to pull up a picture of all those memes that went around social media that say, this is what people think I do. This is what I think I do. This is what my mother thinks I do. This is what my grandparents, this is what I really do. And kind of give them a reality check too. Yeah, do I have a great job? Yes, we have a great job. We really do, all of us have great jobs. And even those of you that are just starting out are getting some great experience and doing some cool stuff. And you'll do some really cool, fun things. But, COVID really emphasized how much desk work can be done in this field because I've spent more time at my desk in the last year and a half than I have in my entire career anywhere. So, I try to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly. But then I ask the practical questions. And the first thing I say is, don't become a marine biologist. And people kind of blink when I say that, which is why when Dr. Reidenberg and I talk all the time, I always call him marine biologist. I'm not a marine biologist. I know you're not, I know that. But so I tell them, okay, let's have a lifestyle conversation. What do you like? And I start with, what kind of weather do you like? Because back in 1980, when I graduated high school, I had planned on studying killer whales in a cove in Alaska, which was about when all this stuff started in Alaska. I am so glad that it took me a while because now I study mostly in the Caribbean and I don't like the cold. I tolerate it to see walruses and all the animals that I love, but I really don't like it. So I'll ask people, do you need to live in a city? Do you need to live where there are no people? Do you need time by yourself, or do you get energized by crowds? Because that matters whether or not you want to be in the outback in Australia or you want to be, somewhere where it's really populated and there's a lot of boats around and right, exactly.
New York City. I'm in New York City.
I was thinking of you as I said this. So I sit down, I go through this whole list of questions. How important is money to you? Is clothes important to you? How important is travel? Do you want to have your own home? Do you not want to have a house? You want to live out of a duffel bag? What lifestyle things? And that helps people kind of start to narrow down, as Dr. Redenberg said, how far in their degree do they want to go? If you want a PhD and you end up being the boss, you will be doing management stuff. That's an office somewhere. But if you get a bachelor's or a master's degree and you work on somebody else's project, you may be doing the cool stuff you really enjoy and go home at the end of the day and have your weekend to yourself. So and then I say, okay, this market is flooded. Getting a job as a marine biologist right now is incredibly difficult, as you all know, and it doesn't pay well at all. And our jobs are usually dependent on getting grant money to fund us. So what I actually try to do is what you have already alluded to. Be an acoustician that studies sound, and then when you're done, study sound with marine mammals or with fish or off the bottom of the ocean. If you like photography, be a photographer that gets a background in this environment, and then be the professional that works for National Geographic and takes those kind of pictures and videography. Don't be a marine biologist, it's too narrow. And then as you get your education, we've talked about our background. Mine is the medicine first. Yours continues to be in medicine, and we both aren't doing solely medicine anymore, but my clinical lab background has made a huge difference in my ability to think differently about problems. So I tell people, my CV, my background looks like clinical laboratory medicine and paramedic is my bachelor's degree. Marine resources management is my master's because I wanted to understand policy law, marine science, and how people looked at it, and marine biology as my PhD. So I really have a lot to tap into by doing that. So I think differently than my peers. If you get a degree as a marine biologist, you're a marine biologist. But if you get a degree in GIS, which some of you may or may not know what it is, but it's a huge mapping tool. You can work in real estate or you can work in marine biology. And so those are the kind of questions that I tell people to do that first. I also wanted to keep teaching. And it's easier to teach with a PhD in advanced education than in a master's degree. It's not impossible, but it's easier. So that was important to me. But the last thing I did to prepare for this, and this might really, really surprise you, but I like riddles, like literal riddle book riddles, because and I guess the endings of movies all the time, because if somebody puts a cup down on a table and it's a bright orange cup, there's not one single thing in a movie that's done without some kind of purpose, down to the clothes that are picked or the props on it. So I'll see that and go, oh, there's a meaning for that. And then I try to figure out what it is. And when people give me riddles, you're always having to bend your mind on what the other meaning is and look at it from a totally different direction. And those kind of things are the way my brain works. And that helps me solve the puzzles in the research that I do. So I tell people, what are your strengths? What do you love?
Mhm.
And work from there, not the other way, not try to squish a square peg.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super important, I think, is to really think about all those other things. And yeah, following not just like, oh, that's super cool, I want to do that, and going into it and not really thinking about, all those external things like where you want to live and what you're actually good at and the way that your mind thinks. And, follow your passions, follow your strengths. I would also like to hear, from all of us, since we're like newer into, getting into bigger careers in marine biology, what are our sort of takes on, how do you become a marine biologist and how do you prepare? Like, what are the steps that we're taking? If any of you guys want to hit on that.
I'd love to hear too, how you guys fit into what we have already said. We've just said what we would recommend to you before you got your bachelor's degree. So now that you know what we would have said, if you could have told yourself in the context of Sierra's question to you before you started, if you could go back and tell yourself, based on that, what would you change and what worked out and what's different? I'm dying of curiosity. We've never had this conversation.
No.
Just to add on to what Dr. Makai was saying, and I was like nodding my head a lot when you were talking, but it's like I ask myself those questions all the time because on one hand, it's like I love being outside, I love being in remote places, but I also love living in cities. So it's hard to like find that balance and to truly ask yourself how you can choose that balance, but also do the things that you love to do. And I think as you get older, it also is difficult because you start to learn more stuff about yourself and you have to take all those things into account as well.
That's true. Yeah, I agree with you, Annabelle. Everything in our lives, since we're so young, is constantly changing. So you might think you want to go in one direction in your career, then it changes a couple months later or a year later. So it's definitely hard to look at the bigger picture sometimes, especially when we are young or just getting out of college and trying to figure out what path to go down in a career. But I definitely think it's important to just take pretty much every chance that you get in a job or an opportunity or just speaking with someone. You never know where that opportunity is going to lead to. And I definitely did not start any of my internships in college with things about humpback whales or manatees, but just the opportunities that I took led to where I am now. So I think that's important to definitely understand when you're starting out a career in marine biology. Just take any opportunity you get.
What would you tell yourself, Melissa? Hearing what our advice was, what would you tell yourself 4 years ago? What would you do different?
Let's see, that's a tough question. I am very happy with where I am now, so I honestly couldn't say that I would change anything. I would tell myself though that things definitely will just work itself out, and like I just said, one opportunity will lead to the next, and as long as you give it your all, and you put in the hard work and effort, then it will work out. Definitely connections are a huge aspect in this career too. You never know who you could talk to next and where that may lead. So yeah.
Yeah, something I kind of kick myself for is, when I graduated high school and everything, or when I was going into high school, I remember all the graduating seniors were like, oh, make sure you join clubs and get to know your professors and do all these things. And that's still relevant for even careers and everything. And looking back, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have been more proactive. I wish I would have gotten more experience doing things. And that's something that I wish I would have told myself, is to have confidence in my capabilities, because I feel like, you're always struggling to get perfect grades when really your grades aren't gonna totally matter. Like you do want to pass your classes, you want to know your curriculum, but no one's really looking at your GPA unless you're in something incredibly GPA relevant, I guess. But just, I was so into my classes and into books, and I wish I would have taken more like internship opportunities or volunteer opportunities, because I went to a coastal college and I didn't do anything at any coastal centers. And I was like, what did I do the whole time? You know, so now I'm 25 and I'm trying to kind of catch up and make up for that time. So just, yeah, reaching out and like looking at those opportunities and having the courage and confidence in yourself and knowing that you are capable if you put in the work and the effort. And if you really love what you're doing, then it shouldn't really be that hard. And it'll just, like Melissa said, it all comes to you and you'll fall in the right place. Iris, do you have anything that you wish you would have told yourself?
For sure, work less.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked a lot during college, and first generation students. I mean, I didn't have that many opportunities, so I would have wished that I looked more into internships and taken my summers and like just been proactive and I mean, just set goals for myself, but I didn't. So those are the things I regret a lot. Just not looking for my future or my best interest in my future and stuff like that. And I'm like only a few years older than you. And I mean, I'm still figuring my life out. I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah.
You know,
yeah.
You shouldn't worry about whether you've taken a wrong turn at this stage, because you guys really are very early in your career trajectories. Most of you are relatively fresh out of college, I think. And there's a long way to go. What I thought I would be fresh out of college is very different than what I am right now. Some of you may know that I have a film career as well as teaching medical students. I also do a lot of work for public television and other networks doing documentaries. And I never, ever thought that film was going to be in my future when I got out of college. That was not my area. I was one of those kids who did work really hard in college because my grades did count, because I thought I was going to be applying to medical school or veterinary college. And my GPA made a huge difference in those applications. I now know that that's not the only thing they look for. They're looking for someone who's done something a little out of the box, a little bit different. And I did a lot of those different things, but I didn't realize that that's what they were looking for at the time. Now I know, 2020 hindsight, of course, but I did make it into graduate school anyway, even though I will tell you, I personally did not have the best grades. And I'm not embarrassed to admit it. I used to be embarrassed to admit it, but I actually got a D in chemistry. And how could anybody get into medical school with a D in chemistry? Well, a lot of things were happening at that time. I won't go into the reasons why, but I ended up in an oral exam because I couldn't take the actual chemistry exam. And my professor, I think, gave it to me really hard because he was pissed off that he didn't give me an oral exam because I couldn't take the regular exam. And I flunked the oral exam. I think he wanted me to, but I had been doing okay in the course up to then. And so I remember being devastated, thinking I'm never going to make it into medical school or veterinary school with this grade. So I retook it over the summer. And I did very well in the summer course. And I remember when I applied for graduate school, one of the questions I got asked was, what's with this D in chemistry? And I knew that if I just went into a whole defense of why I got the D, and I had reasons, but if I went into a whole defense of why I got the D, it would all be about me being defensive. And I thought the better answer was, I don't like that grade either. I didn't like it. And that's why I took the summer school course. And I want you to look at my summer school grade as reflective of my current knowledge in this subject, because that's what really counts, is what do I know now? And they respected that answer, and it didn't hold me back. And I ended up getting into graduate school despite grades. And so, like Iris was saying, it's not so much that, we need to tell ourselves, don't work so hard, but don't worry so much about those grades. In the long run, no one is going to ask you years later, what grade did you get in chemistry? No one's ever asked me that. Once I got into graduate school, no one ever asked me that question. So it really didn't matter as long as I had a passing knowledge of the material. But it can matter if you want to go to, further education, and grades are one of the criteria for getting into the university that you want to get to for master's degree or PhD degree or MD degree. However, if you're more interested in doing field work and not necessarily pursuing those higher degrees, then your other experiences play a much bigger role. If you can bring something unique to the table, that's more important in getting that job than just being, oh, I'm the marine biologist and I looked at sea stars or whatever. If you are the person who learned how to use mapping systems like GIS or whatever, you bring something different to the table than the person who just knows what's in a tide pool. And I think that that's a really important set of skills to have. And it doesn't have to be that one. That's just the example that I know that Mithriel brought in. But if you have some other skills that you can contribute that others might not have, that's important. That makes you unique. That makes you more valuable. Maybe you know how to sail a ship. Maybe you know how to, maybe you know how a dredge works, and understand the geology of what's going on underneath those layers. Maybe you're an acoustician. You understand sound and, the harmfulness of sound in the environment. Maybe you understand, conservation things, but, in a foreign country. Whatever your extra talent is and your extra experience is, that's going to count a lot more than just you majored in marine biology. It's okay to major. And by the way, it's okay to major in marine biology. I'm not saying you shouldn't. If that's what you're interested in, you should do it. But focus on a wider area. See what else interests you and get experiences in other things that interest you. And you will end up combining those things in your career. I, for example, minored in art and art history. I mean, who really cared about Greek sculptures in the field of, going into medicine? Nobody, except that my understanding of Greek sculpture and other things like that makes me a better anatomist because I'm focused on the body and the shapes of the body and how it looks. And I'm focused on understanding art because that's the medium through which we transmit our information to the public. So when I did the documentary filmings, I also did a lot of the base drawings for the animations that accompanied what we were showing in the documentary because I am an artist. And so that's another part of my career that's really not marine biology, but it's the best way to tell you what's going on inside the head of a sperm whale when you're trying to figure out how they're making sound. You need some kind of artistic way of demonstrating that. Now, as far as, getting into really weird and unusual career paths, my career path in film was not something that I had planned. I never saw myself as the person who was going to be in front of a television. I didn't think I had the right physique. I certainly didn't think I had the beauty queen face. I didn't really like watching TV, actually. So when I got approached to be part of a documentary team to head it up, what I really saw it as is a teaching opportunity rather than, you being a glamorous anchor woman or something. And for me, it was the best way to teach literally millions of people at once. Instead of just giving a lecture to 100 people, I could give that same information to millions of people through television. And so I fell into it very easily because of my skills as a teacher.
That's such an interesting picture on this, because you and I, Joy, worked together with Dr. Carrie Sager on a project. And the reason the three of us work together, well, there's a lot of reasons. One is because we just have a blast working together. But your field and so I study behaviors, behavioral ecology. I look at behaviors in the context of how marine mammals mostly are functioning in their environment, but I have a heavy dose of evolutionary biology that comes into it. Thank you, Dr. Christopher Marshall, for making me do that, as much as I hated it. But it helps me get more clues, solve my riddles. And Carrie does acoustics, she does sound. And you might remember the conversation that we had about me stopping the two of you during a Zoom meeting and saying, you guys think about hearing totally, the wrong way for this project we're doing. And what most people don't know is I'm deaf. I read lips, which makes this work pretty well. And so I bring something totally different to the table. My way of perceiving the world and looking at the world through behaviors, because I am very visual, obviously. I'm not audio, I'm visual, but I study sound. You can't study humpback whales without studying sound. You can't really study the marine environment without studying sound. I do it in a very narrow context with behaviors, but humpback whales sing and they vocalize. And so during that conversation, I looked at Joy and Kerry and said, I have a car and I only buy cars where my knee will touch the speaker on the door. Because I can usually tell, since my hearing loss was progressive and I listen to older songs usually, so I know what they are, I can usually tell what the music is, but I can at least tell when people are talking versus when there's music playing. So if you think about that, to me, coming through the speaker through my knee is, blah, 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 it's random, right? But music is, bop, 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 bop. There's a steady beat, at least one steady beat in it. And that's when Joy said, but your knee, the anatomy of your knee is like this, so it conducts sound like this. And Carrie said, sound, it must be doing like this. So then and so all of you asking you what you would have told yourself before, the idea wasn't to say, I regret this. We are what we go through. We bring in something different because of our experiences. I'm really glad I got to cycle back and do whales. I mean, I remember at 5 years old looking at the bottom of the ocean off Nantasket Beach in a little bitty boat with my family, wondering what the whales were doing at the bottom because we had strandings there a lot. And asking my dad, he said, oh, they're sleeping, because he thought I would be afraid if I knew they were under. And all I could think of is, how come I can't see them? So Annabelle, I mean, I don't want to interrupt you because I'm really dying to know too.
Mhm.
Since I haven't had this conversation, and you all are so different, and you all bring such very different things to all the projects you do. But I'm really curious where you came from on this.
As far as what we would tell ourselves like 4 years ago.
Yeah, and what your experiences have taught you through this, how you got where you are.
Oh, that's so hard. So my instinct is to obviously go on the regret path with this, but you told us not to. So, but I think it's easy to choose to think that way sometimes when, you know, we're living in this society where you're always comparing yourself to other people. Yeah, man, that's so hard. I think I would just go back and tell myself that, like what Melissa said, everything's going to work out and things aren't so linear in life and they don't have to be. And I think that's what life is about. You know, you follow your interests, you say yes to different opportunities, anything that comes along, and that's kind of what will make you well-rounded as a person. So I think I would go back more and tell my earlier self not to worry as much, not to focus as much on grades, not to compare myself to others, you know, just things along those lines.
I think I would tell my earlier, younger self, grab the unusual opportunities when they come by. You know, don't let them pass you by, because you never know where they're going to lead you. And even when they come later in life, grab them. It's not just something for the young folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was saying about the filming opportunity, if I hadn't made a split decision about whether I was going to catch a train home so I can get my passport, so I can get to the airport at time, so I can get to Ireland, so I can dissect a fin whale that's on the beach for a documentary, that all happened in the space of 4 minutes. I had to decide, was I going to make this trip?
Wow.
And I didn't even know if I was going to be successful in getting to the airport in time because it was such a last minute call. But I decided to take the risk and go. And what I got out of that was a very rewarding new career that I do on the side. Even though I'm full-time employed by the medical school, I'm still allowed 52 days a year of consulting work, which means basically 1 day a week, and weekends don't count. So that gives me extra days. And I just did all my filming mostly on weekends and maybe taking a Friday before. And I ended up with a second career in film that I just never thought I would be in, because I made a split decision one day that I was going to go to Ireland at the drop of a hat on a plane to go work with a film company I'd never heard of before to dissect a whale, which I had done before, but never in the middle of a freaking storm. But that's a whole nother story. But you want to watch the episode, it's Inside Nature's Giants, fin whale dissection. And that was my introduction into a career in film.
Do you find that American students, like people in our country, are more timid about doing that? Because I find that especially Australian and Europeans seem to be more accustomed to travel than we are in our country, or we travel here, but we seem to feel like we have a safe bubble as long as we're in our country's borders. But even, I remember I got accepted to a couple of universities in Hawaii when I came out of high school, and I opted not to go because I had no idea how to make that happen, and neither did my parents. You know, it's a different generation. But I find that American students, how do you guys feel about that? And Joy, do you find that to be the same thing?
I'm not so sure. I sometimes think it's very much a financial decision. I did not do a year abroad because I couldn't afford it. And like Iris, I was also a first generation college student. And in fact, I got married while I was still in college. And so I had additional other pressures on me in terms of whether I could leave and go somewhere. And in fact, it created some constraints on where I ended up doing graduate school because I didn't want to be away from my husband. But it all worked out. But as far as whether Americans travel more than others and get those experiences, I think it all depends on finances to a large degree. If one has the ability to do that, going over the big pond over to Europe or down to South America, these are long flights and you have to spend money to be in other accommodations and get food and stuff. It might be easier for people who are in Europe or in South America, where there are lots of countries in a small space, because you can go across borders more easily and not have to go that far. But our country is so freaking big that if you want to get to another country, you really have to make a concerted effort to travel. You can't just like drive across the border. I mean, unless you just want to go to Canada, Mexico, and you live near the border. Those are really our only options here. What I did, and I don't know if I'm unusual as a student or not, but when I was in high school, I worked at a marine biology station in Bermuda for a summer. That was my travel abroad. And it was a bold step for me to do at the time. Because people didn't do that in high school. That was a high school thing that I did. But I didn't do it in college like many other people do. On the other hand, I think Americans tend to take a gap year much more frequently than Europeans do. And in that gap year tend to do travel or some other work experience that's something outside of the academic realm that might give them a leg up in terms of their applications to medical school, for example, which is what I'm most familiar with, and makes them a more unusual candidate. But I assume it would be the same in getting a job in marine biology. If you had some other experience, maybe you worked on a trawler ship, and understood something like, fisheries management or whatever, it would give you something different that you bring to the table.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Redenberg. I think as you mentioned, but your financial, situation, that definitely depends on if you can travel or have those experiences sometimes too. I also think it depends on how comfortable you are with change and maybe being on your own as well. In high school, I went on a trip to Costa Rica and Belize for 2 weeks. And that was just by myself with, 10 other students, but they were across the country. I didn't know anyone going into it, but I knew I wanted to go in the marine biology aspect later in college. So I took that trip, but I was definitely more comfortable with change and experiencing new situations too. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
I was terrified.
If finances are a problem, I would suggest that if you're going to do a gap year or you're going to do a summer experience, don't volunteer if you can get money to do it.
Yeah.
Because that will make it a more affordable experience. One of the biggest problems, I think, is that people readily volunteer to get the job that they like because it seems more attractive, and then they don't earn any money. And if you're rich, I guess you can get away with that. And if you're not rich, that becomes a very big burden. And it's a real conundrum to be in, because you're choosing between whether you've got the money to spend being away for so long and paying for lodging and paying for airfare and whatever, food, versus the luxury of being able to do that because you're using your own money or your parents' money. And I feel very badly for those who can't afford to do that experience. And I would say they might be sacrificing what they might think is their ideal experience to do something a little more mundane. So maybe they're peeling, potatoes in the kitchen, but they might be peeling potatoes in the kitchen on a trawler ship, and in which case they get some other experiences. I did that. Okay. I worked on a trawler ship. And while I was on that trawler ship, because I wanted to get marine biology experience in an unusual way, I had been volunteering, but I needed to have lodging that I could afford. And when you're on the ship, you don't pay for lodging. Yeah. So I volunteered in a situation where they paid the food and they paid the lodging, and I just provided labor. And working on the trawler ship, I volunteered for all the extra activities so I could learn as much as I could. I learned how to use a Secchi disc. I learned how to put in a thermoprobe and figure out what the depth and the temperatures were. This was early on when those probes were like brand new things, and I was the one who wanted to do it because I wanted to learn everything I could in that experience. I didn't want to just be the person hauling a net in. And so, I dissected open fish and I tried to figure out what all the different parasites were on the fish. Whatever I could do, I looked for those extra opportunities. And so I think that if you have the opportunity to do something and it's not a financial strain, do it, because you never know where it's going to lead. I never knew that experience working on the trawler ship was one of the things that made me an unusual candidate when I applied to college. And I think that's part of the reason I got picked to go to college, even though my grades weren't the best. I was pretty good. I was smart, but I wasn't the straight A kid. I wasn't ranked first in the class. I was a little bit lower down, but I had this unusual experience. No one else had had an experience like that.
And for me, I find not anymore at all, but when I started to travel, I was terrified, absolutely terrified. I can navigate any place there are not roads. No problem using, natural markers. Put me in the middle of a city, Boston, no less, right? So I grew up on the South Shore of Massachusetts. Put me in Boston where it's paved horse trails and it's not the Napoleon grid, A's, alphabet goes one way, numbers go another way. And you'll never see, I'll be Charlie on the MTA. You will never see me again. I know most of you don't know that song. Maybe, Joy, you do. But you'd never see me again. I tell people, okay, I'm leaving. But now we have GPS on our phone. And I'll tell you that there is some peer-reviewed publications that show that sense of direction is genetic. There is like a family line. My entire family, for the most part, cannot navigate anywhere, but now we have it on our phone. So now it's super easy. But at the time, if I missed the exit on the highway that I knew to get to my house when I first started driving, I was terrified. So the idea of getting on a plane and going to another country, never mind to a place where it didn't speak the same language. But what tipped the scales for me were a couple of things. And I didn't have any money. And like Joy, I got married while I was an undergraduate, and I actually had 2 kids while I was an undergraduate. So, that's what changed me from marine biology to something that I needed to stay home for. And again, my clinical lab degree, I wouldn't trade it. It really has offered me a lot to offer other people, but it meant I didn't go anywhere. I was content with that for a long time. And then everybody was gone, and now I needed something to do. Culturally, it opened my eyes, of course, understanding nothing's weird anymore. It's just different. And I'm really grateful for those experiences. But I've also met a lot of people from other countries that go places with no money. And one of my absolute idols is an RA that I had, and she went from being with me in Puerto Rico, she went all the way up to Canada, around down the west coast of the United States, through Central America, down South America, and she just got jobs as she went along and knew that somehow she would eat and she could sleep anywhere. It didn't matter. And it worked. And I would do that now. But at your age, I was terrified. I would never find anybody I ever knew ever again. Now I try to get lost when I go to remote places to see where I'm going to be, because eventually you're going to hit water. You can't go any further. Somebody will find you, or I'll have a GPS. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. I don't even care anymore. but I've done a lot of things that I was terrified of, and discovered about myself I was more afraid of missing out than I was afraid of whatever it was. So I was absolutely terrified of flying. And then I got an opportunity to do aerial surveys, and I knew that there would be over whales. And it's the first time I saw a blue whale from the air, because I had done every whale watch out of Massachusetts that I could when they started, which is when I was in college. But the first time I ever saw a blue whale from the air, I was in a 6-seater plane with windows that kind of bowed out so that you were able to look down at the water. And if you saw an animal, the idea was that the pilot would tilt the plane at 45 degrees and circle. And so if you were at the window, imagine feeling like you were about to be dumped out of a soap bubble and just plummet to your death, right? Screaming the whole way down. That's what I figured. But what happened is I got in there, and the first animal we saw were 2 blue whales. And we could see them come up in the water from subsurface, and then as they surfaced, and all of a sudden I realized that I was 45 degrees on the downside of the plane with my hands on the window, looking down and realizing I wasn't scared because I was so excited. And that kind of just dispelled with that. So going and doing those things and taking those chances. It's nice if you have a credit card and you can say, okay, if the world falls apart, I can get a ticket somewhere, I can eat a meal or whatever. But I've really learned about a lot of people that go and do this with no security. And just figure it out as they go. Say, well, as long as I'm willing to sleep anywhere. And when I say anywhere, I don't mean like in an unsafe alley, people around you of questionable motives, I'm talking like if you don't mind camping in the middle of the outback in Australia, New Zealand, or, backpacking and staying in hostels or whatever, then the opportunities that you can grab, like Joy was saying, are going to be really amazing. So
that's something I've noticed too, is like when you think back about like what are the best experiences I've had in life, they're always the ones where I'm challenging my comfort zones, and the ones where I go into it like, I don't know, I'm kind of scared, but you do it and it's just the best. I know Annabelle and I both did a semester at least abroad in Australia, right?
I volunteered one summer in New Zealand.
Okay. So we've been abroad, and just that's something that I never thought I would have done in elementary and middle school and high school even. And it was kind of a last second choice, but I did it. And getting the cultural view, and it was, finances weren't easy for me either, but it was nice that I went to the cheapest state university that I could in California so that I could avoid having student debt. And even though it meant I couldn't go to my dream schools, I still was able to do something huge and go to Australia at the same cost it was to my university. So I think going way back to the start of the conversation with traveling and noticing any trends with Americans versus Europeans and stuff, I do notice a lot of Europeans and Australians travel a lot more. Americans do take gap years, and that does give them a benefit, I think, in some aspects of having those unique experiences, if that's what they seek when they do those. But when I was growing up too, it was almost my family kind of really pushed college and really pushed me to go through it. And I remember when I wanted to take time off, or when I was like kind of throwing that idea around, it was like, make sure you don't, you go back to school, make sure you finish school. So that was kind of ingrained in me. And I feel like that's a very Western ideal, is that there's this pressure to be successful and to continue school and to get as high of an education as you can get. And so sometimes the travel is limited in that aspect too.
I would say travel isn't always the answer. It's great if you can do it, but seek an unusual experience. It doesn't have to be through travel. One of my unusual experiences was I worked in a bacteriology lab at a veterinary college because it was easy to do. It was at the same college where I was going to school anyway. And they had a veterinary college. And so I got some experience in medical related stuff, which served me well getting into graduate school. So I didn't have to go anywhere. I was still at the same college I was at over the summer, but it was an unusual experience. It wasn't the usual thing that most people did. It certainly contrasts very much with working on a trawler, I have to say. But I think just gathering lots of different unusual experiences that don't necessarily have to involve travel, but they have to be in areas you're somewhat interested in. So you have a passion for it in some way. Will make you a more well-rounded candidate for getting that job or getting that place in graduate school, you know, depending what your career trajectory is taking you toward. I think the biggest conundrum, and I'd love to hear from you guys, is do you volunteer to get the ideal position you really like? Or do you go for the paid position, but it's not doing what you really want to do? And which is the better path to take when you're given that choice? What do you folks think?
Well, I'm sure it varies among opportunities, but I would have to go with, I think it's best if you volunteer for the position that's most in line with your direction you want to go in at the moment, because you never know what might open up once you're a volunteer within that organization or the place that you're working at. Definitely know lots of people who I went to school with where they volunteered somewhere and now they work at that facility. That's partly how I got to be where I am right now in my full-time position. I started out as an intern doing some sea turtle work in Florida, and then it led to some research through the same facility with manatees, and then now I still work with manatees, but definitely went out on a limb and took a volunteer opportunity one summer, and one thing led to the next. So,
Iris, what do you say?
I definitely would have taken the volunteer if I was stable enough financially, for sure. Yeah, I'm the type of person that if I'm not happy where I am, it's bad for everybody around me. So I'm a very happy, I like to be a very happy person all the time. So yeah, I would 100% rather be somewhere where I'm happy and having the time of my life than somewhere where I'm miserable and maybe even get stuck at and that just wouldn't be my fit.
Yeah, that's a good point. You need to be happy in whatever you do. And if your finances are bringing you down or any other stressors because you are volunteering somewhere, then that could really affect that volunteer position. And then you might not want to go down that path anymore. So yeah, definitely have to be happy and comfortable where you are.
And choose
Annabelle?
your positions really carefully too. Make sure if you volunteer that there's an exchange. I'm coming on board to do this, but you should expect to be mentored, not just be there and hope to absorb it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what Melissa and Iris were saying. Financials are definitely something to consider, and it is a scary decision to make, but I think I would rather volunteer for a position, or at least try to get my foot in the door with something that I would really love doing, instead of choosing a paid position where it just wouldn't be a good fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Dr. MacKay brings up a very interesting point, which is if you do volunteer, you should have a very clear understanding of what you're getting out of it, besides just giving away free labor.
Right.
So maybe you're going to get room and board in exchange for your volunteer efforts. Maybe you're going to get a letter of recommendation. Maybe you're going to get to be on a publication. Maybe you're going to get that mentoring, and career advice as to how to move up within that organization. and get the paid position that you really do want, not the paid position peeling potatoes, but the one, where you might be directing the research in some way. So I think you should weigh the pros and cons of any volunteer position you come across. Don't just volunteer because, oh, it's fun, I get to play with the sea turtles or the manatees. But what are you going to get out of it besides the fact that you got to touch these animals, which is cool. It's very cool. But what are you taking home as a skill afterwards? Or are you getting some kind of other compensation that isn't money, like a letter of recommendation that you might need, or housing, or whatever it is? But look for a bargain, to balance it. Don't just give away your labor free unless you're getting something out of it.
That should sound familiar to each one of you, because when you interviewed, one of the big things that we did together was make a plan and say, you're all smiling because it's familiar, right? What are you going to get out of it? What are your goals? What do you need? What are you going to walk away with? What are you striving to learn? Not just how, and you all had to stop and think about it, right? So we had a couple of interviews and it was, okay, we've talked about it, now go away before we come back again, because we're going to have a conversation about what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And I have that, you probably know, I have those lists in writing and I check them all the time to make sure that you're getting, and it shifts a little bit. You're all different. As we get to know each other, we identify what your interests are enough so that I can look and say, you're getting bored. Right, Annabelle? Do you feel stuck in what you're doing? Do you need a little bit more, a little bit of a change? And give you a safe space to be able to say, this isn't rocking my world. I know that I have to do this, this, and this to make this work, but I need something that really rocks my world a little bit right now, right? Or, hey, I need some safe space. I don't want, this summer, we all didn't want our worlds rocked. All of us had stuff going on that we all needed a breath. So we slowed the pace down, right? So that we could do that. So yeah, I'm on board with that. And you've all had that, but that's super important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I think about other volunteer positions that I've had before, like they definitely showed me what I did and didn't want to do. And then I think this position, even though it's not really like a volunteer position, it's an internship which progressed into a research assistant position. I've advanced more in my career and been more confident in my capabilities than I have in anything else. And yeah, it's incredible the different doors it's opened and everything. And I've only been here since November of last year, so it's not even a whole year, and that's really, really awesome. I needed that personally, and yeah, just taking those volunteer positions can really change everything if it's something you're interested in, instead of just going for something that's paid that may not be, what's meant for you, which actually kind of goes into what we're going to be talking about in a few weeks. We're going to have another Whack-A-Mole Wednesday topic of whether internships should be paid or not. And that's a very hot topic, very differing views, but I think it's a very healthy and necessary conversation that needs to happen, because we are always like, oh, well, if I'm doing these things, I want to be paid. And then we don't see the other end of it, though, about, the logistics of why things are or aren't paid. So yeah, very excited for that conversation. It has been an hour into our talk, and we were going to make it an hour. I think this is a good note to end it on too, unless anybody has anything that they would like to add, or just share really quickly about anything on the conversation that we just had. But give it a couple seconds.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
It has, yeah.
I would say follow the advice of Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. If any of you remember her?
Yeah.
What
Get
advice?
messy, take chances, make mistakes. I can't remember what order it was in, but those are things you should do.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah. So with all that, then, thank you, Dr. Makai. Thank you, Dr. Reidenberg, for joining us. Thank you, Annabelle, Melissa, and Iris. Love talking to you guys. I love seeing you guys all the time too. It was really nice to meet you too, Dr. Reidenberg, and hear more about you. That's been awesome. And I loved hearing everybody's insights. And hopefully everybody who has been watching this live or will watch this live has also enjoyed it. We will be doing another topic next Wednesday, and the following Wednesdays. Follow our social media, typically Facebook, we're the most active, and that's where you can see all of our, we have different news posts, we have different YouTube videos, and we'll be letting you know about all the different topics we have coming up. We have a CV course coming up, so more info will be coming on that too. Otherwise, yeah, that's all I have. And
Thank you so much, Sierra, for organizing this.
yeah, thank you.
Great job.
Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for showing up, and yeah, I know a little bit more about you now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I look forward to continuing these open conversations in the following weeks.
Sounds wonderful.
All right, so
We'll talk soon.
yeah, we'll talk soon. Thank you all again.
Bye.